G'day folks. Earlier today I watched a great video by 3 Minute Board Games. They had compiled some data on Board Game Geek's top 50 ranked games from way back in 2006, and they'd compiled this chart of the top 20 board games on Board Game Geek over the period from 2007 to 2020. And as I was watching this, I was focusing really on the rankings of the war games in this top 20. I looked at Paths of Glory, what else appears? We have Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, Command and Colours, Ancients, and so forth. And I was really focusing on where they sat in this list. It didn't take long for them to drop off the top 20, and then of course Twilight Struggle appears at the top, and it got me thinking about the top rankings for war games. So I decided to do my own list and chart of war games that appear in Board Game Geek's top 50 using the same data set for those board games as a whole, which I'll run through this in more detail in just a moment, but first let me explain the background. Now fortunately we have this amazing collection of data from Tom Verdonk. He, since November 2006, has been compiling this list of the top 50 games on the Board Game Geek rankings. So you can go to a particular month. This is the first month he started compiling it. You can see Puerto Rico, Tigris and Euphrates, Kalis and so forth. And you can go through and chart these over time. So every month Tom indicates a change in the ratings, a change in votes, owners, plays, and so forth. And as these go up and down, he indicates changes in ratings. So what 3 Minute Board Game did was they focused on all the games in the top 20. But my fascination, as I said, was drawn to war games. So I spent a couple of hours compiling the data from these lists to get sort of a similar chart of war games that have appeared in this these statistics on the top 50. Now, there's a few things I need to say before I show you this this running chart. First of all, I started this in 2010. Much of the data between 2007 and 2010 didn't change a great deal, so I thought 2010 was a good starting point. Secondly, these rankings, what do they mean? They are not, and I think we all recognise, they're not an accurate reflection of the quality of a game. They are a ranking based on a specific set of Board Game Geek criteria, which include things such as certainly user rankings, but also number of owners. I believe also number of plays factors into this, and I believe also that the users who rate these are some users are valued and have their ratings weighted more than other users. So if you rate, let's say, 1,000 different games, your ratings will be weighted higher than a user who only has, let's say, 5 or 10 games rated. So they're not, as I said, they're not an indication of the quality of the game. They are more an indication of the perhaps mass market appeal of these games. And I think that's really what Board Game Geek has been aiming at. So these ratings, they are based on user input and the nature of those users. In particular, Board Game Geek has seen an exodus of wargamers over the past 5, 6, 7 years, and I would argue that that's also being sort of reflected in the statistics that we can see on wargame ratings. As these sort of users leave, they also remove their data from the site, and it skews the results that we see. As I said, this is the mass market appeal of these games, and it is ultimately difficult for war games to compete with, particularly over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, the increasing mass market appeal of many thematic and strategy games, to use the technical Board Game Geek titles that we've seen on the market. I certainly think the board game community has hugely expanded over the past decade. The number of games certainly has increased a lot, and it has been increasingly difficult for war games um, to compete for space in this Board Game Geek top 50. That's not to say they're not doing well. I would argue that the war game community is healthier and the war game market is healthier today, despite COVID, than what we've seen at any time in the past. I think the main reason we're not seeing war games in the top 50 is because of the greater mass market appeal of those thematic and strategy games. Ultimately, those strategy and thematic games have that broader appeal. They're all games are increasing in interest and appeal, and sales are increasing and so forth. It is just that those strategic thematic games are increasing more so than typical war game, and they're occupying that space in the top 50. Now, to find information about war games, including a list of pretty much all war games and their rankings from 1 to however many thousand, you can just go to the website on Board Game Geek of any war game. And down on the bottom right hand side here, where it says classification, you'll see type war games. Basically, anybody can come along and vote on what they think this game is. So if I think this is a war game, I can tick war game and vote. You can see some people think this is a strategy game. Some people are silly, think this is a party game or children's game or a thematic game. So this skews ratings somewhat. If you want to go to all the war games, you can click on that war games link. It takes you to the war games page. Scroll down a bit where it says linked items. Click on rank, and you get a list of all war games labelled with that war game categorization, ranked from 1 to, well, however many thousand there are. You can see Twilight Struggle, War of the Ring and Root at the top, and I'll return to these three later on. Everything else below this falls not only outside the top 50 but even outside the top 100. You can see Star Wars X-Wing miniatures game is considered a war game by these classification polls and so forth. I'll demonstrate how this works. If I come along here, you can see 33% of people think it's a war game, 52% of people think it's a customizable game. And if it's close like this, 20 percentage points, it'll be listed in both categories. So if you disagree with that, come along and, as I'm about to do, rank this something other than a war game, which will increase the percentage of people who voted for this and decrease the percentage of people who voted for a war game. Alright, I think I've spoken enough about that background context. So take this all with a grain of salt. Okay, so here we have my starting point in January 2010. You can see Twilight Struggle is already the leading war game. We still have appearing in the top 50 games like Memoir 44, Advanced Squad Leader, Battle or Conflict of Heroes, Awakening the Bear, War of the Ring, Combat Commander, Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage. Very quickly, we begin to see some of these games drop out of the top 50. Battle Law drops off, Conflict of Heroes drops off, Memoir 44 drops off. This is July 2011. Advanced Squad Leader drops out of the top 50 in August. A Few Acres of Snow makes a brief appearance in November 2011 before dropping off a few months later. You'll also notice War of the Ring appears and War of the Ring Collector's Edition appears before the Collector's Edition sees a rapid decline in July 2012 and drops out of the top 50. The second edition of War of the Ring appears now in February 2013. Here I Stand had a good run around 7th and 8th before dropping out of the top 50 in April 2013. So throughout this period there is a very steady decline of these war games. Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, once in sort of steadily in the top 20, dropped out of the top 50 in January 2014. Combat Commander nearly approached a top 10 game on Board Game Geek and then gradually saw this decline, and it hovered around the 45 to 50 ranking before finally dropping out in February 2015. Made a brief reappearance before dropping off again. Commands and Colours and Paths of Glory hung in for such a long time. They were again nearly top 10 games, and it was, I remember when Paths of Glory dropped out of the top 50 around 2015, and it had long been one of my favourite games. So it was sad to see that disappear. From June 2016, there were really only 2 of these war games in the top 50, Twilight Struggle and the second edition of War of the Ring. And again, this is where we see just the expansion of that broader board game market and a greater mass market appeal of so many other non-war games. Throughout 2016, 2017, 2018, and the first half of 2019, these games remain the only 2 war games, and again, I'm using that term broadly, in the Board Game Geek top 50. This is quite different to the situation 10 years ago when we had 12, 13, 14 war games. And again, to reiterate, this is not necessarily a reflection on these games. It's more that we're seeing more and greater quality thematic and strategic games to compete with these games on that ranking system. Now in June 2019, Root appeared, and it rapidly jumped into the top 50, hung around the 20s and 30s for a long time. Now I have played this. I personally don't consider this a war game, but about 40 to 45% of people who have played it do consider it a war game. So I'm listing here, along with those other games. War of the Ring, again, it's debatable whether or not it's a war game, and there's been a lot of debate around Twilight Struggle. I'm not going to get into that debate. Now I know it's probably easy to look at this list and think, okay, all these war games are dropping off the Board Game Geek top 50. This could be interpreted as a decline of war games. And again, I want to re-emphasize that point, that that's just not the case. It really reflects the strength of gaming more broadly. And to give you an example, one of my favourite games, Paths of Glory, which I ranked 10 out of 10. Back when it occupied the 15th spot in Board Game Geek's rankings, this is November 2006, it had a rating of 7.55, it had 600 votes and about 1,100 owners. Okay, today, Paths of Glory has 8,000 owners. This is 14 years later. It has an average rating of 8, so it is more highly rated than it was back then. And everything points to the sort of, this was originally published back in 1999, and it has grown hugely over the past 14 years since it occupied 15th spot. It now occupies 142nd spot overall and remains one of my favourite games of all time. Still a 10 out of 10 since, for many, many years. And again, just to give another example of the expansion of the market, the game Paths of Glory, that occupied 15th spot back in 2006, had 1,000 owners with a rating of 7.75, can be contrasted with the game that occupies 15th spot overall today, Terra Mystica. It has 40,000 owners and an average rating of 8.157. So this is basically 40 times as many owners to occupy this 15th spot as Paths of Glory required. And again, this is a reflection of how much the hobby has expanded in terms of board gaming as a whole. And again, part of that is shared by the wargaming market and by wargaming more broadly. What this chart really demonstrates is the number and the nature of those war games in Board Game Geek's top 50. As of August 2020, there are only 3 war games in Board Game Geek's top 20: Twilight Struggle, War of the Ring, and Root. And these are, I think, we'd all agree, three of the war games with certainly the most mass market appeal. Are they the best war games? That's very subjective, but I think it's hard to argue with the point that they probably, as far as the broad spectrum of war games go, they probably have the most mass market appeal, and that's why they appear at the top of that list.